I Hate the News is the weekly news bulletin from I Hate Politics podcast, a show about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. It's January 28th, 2025. Needless to say, no Philly cheesesteaks on the menu for a few weeks, and we don't have to skimp on coffee just yet. But those eggs are getting pricier and pricier. We lead off with a hearing from Maryland House of Delegates Economic Matters Committee on rising electricity prices. The Department of Permitting Services, the people who allow homes to be built, additions to be added, major repairs to occur, it seems can't spend the money it has been allowed to, even as pending cases continue to grow. Maryland set up a program in 2021 to give renters on the verge of eviction legal assistance, and it seems to have worked. In an effort to enable more affordable housing, the city of Rockville has amended its town center master plan, easing height restrictions and eliminating some off-street parking requirements. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by the Political Science Program at UMBC Shady Grove, where you'll learn a strong foundation in public policy, pre-law, and international affairs for an impactful career in a number of essential areas. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from the 1920s. Song recordings and films from a century ago just entered the public domain this January. First up, Tea for Two by the Benson Orchestra of Chicago. We've been following the ongoing rise in electricity prices and looking inside the truly complex mechanism that allows electricity to be generated, transmitted, and distributed. Maryland is what they call a restructured or deregulated state, compared with, say, West Virginia, which is not deregulated. Deregulation decouples generation, transmission, and distribution, privatizes and deregulates generation, but maintains much stricter rules for distribution, which is what most ratepayers really see. Between generation and distribution is transmission, and typically transmission is managed not inside a state, but as part of multi-state markets called regional transmission organizations. The Regional Transmission Organization, or RTO, of which both Maryland and West Virginia are a part, is called PJM Interconnection. PJM covers 13 states from New Jersey to Illinois and from Pennsylvania to North Carolina, and is governed not by any of these states, but by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. One of its primary tasks is to ensure reliable supply of electricity by building transmission lines from generating stations to power consumption areas. And by virtue of that role, it is also the lead agency in what is called resource adequacy planning. Simply put, making sure there's enough generation capacity. Internally, PJM operates as a nonprofit entity, but its voting members are almost all generators and utilities, and a minority of consumer advocates. All of this is now a heady mix of conflicts, demand-supply gaps from failures to project correctly and rising prices. Jason Stanek, who used to be the chair of Maryland's Public Service Commission, the state's utility regulator, now works for PJM. And he was in Annapolis recently to try and clear things up.
The energy outlook in the state of Maryland is dire. I think PJM now has been warning for several years about the prospects that part of our country could run short of power during periods of high demand. And this possibility has been growing rather rapidly, primarily as the result of state and federal policies and interventions that are pushing generators to depart and retire prematurely. This is also due to unprecedented demand that we're seeing not only in the state of Maryland, but across our region. And you're aware of data center intensity, you're aware of electrification of buildings, proliferation of electric vehicles in our state. Even so, the situation in Maryland is much more concerning than other states that we serve. 4 things. As you know, Maryland is a net energy importer. It does not have energy independence. It imports on average 40% of its needs from its neighbors. Number 2, Maryland is losing some of the largest power generation sources at the same time that demand is increasing rapidly. Number 3, Maryland is lagging far behind other states in PJM in the development of its preferred resources, notably solar and wind. And number 4, Maryland's transmission system, the high voltage system that we rely on to deliver watts to our businesses and homes, is weak and either at or near capacity. So while PJM's top responsibility, our primary goal, is to maintain system reliability, we also share the concern that you have about rising prices that are caused by this supply-demand imbalance. You may have recently seen in the news last week, BGE announced that rates for its average customer will go up $26 a month this year alone. I will say PJM has been improving new generation, mostly renewable generation projects to connect the grid at record pace. The year ending December 31st of 2024, we approved over 70,000 megawatts of projects. We also currently have a large number of projects with approvals in hand, but they are not getting built due to factors outside of PJM's control, including permitting at the state level, supply chain issues, financing, and others. If Maryland does not begin to address its resource adequacy needs, basic economics will determine that when we're in a period of decreasing supply and increasing demand, prices will only go in one direction, and that will be up.
Stanek's implication that the state was primarily responsible for the demand-supply gap brought this line of questioning from Delegate C.T. Wilson, chair of the Economic Matters Committee, which was holding the hearing, and then other delegates.
Maryland has not forced any of these to shutter, correct?
Not forced. There was no directive from the state to retire.
Correct. And I understand your point that, well, we passed regulations because, God forbid, we have a clean environment. But it seems like a lot of other states are also doing similar things, correct?
In terms of decarbonization policies?
Correct.
Yes.
All right. So again, it's not uncommon for older facilities that are oil and coal across the region or the country to start closing down if they can't keep up with the newest technology.
It boils down to the economics. These are competitive generators and developers. They obviously want to turn a profit. You've probably heard a lot about the interconnection queue at PJM and how it's gotten jammed up in recent years with applications from developers to connect to the grid. We're trying to figure out what percentage of our interconnected projects do we need to just break even, have supply meet demand. And as of last year, we were predicting 62% of all projects that are in the interconnection queue will need to materialize in order just to break even. If we're below that target, we'll have a resource adequacy problem.
Are you accepting applications currently?
Yes.
When did we start accepting applications again?
There was a misconception that the queue was closed,
right.
The window was shut. That is not true. PJM was continually receiving these applications. We have not been reviewing the newer applications until we successfully clear out the queue, which will be at the end of next year. Any new applications will begin to be reviewed in end of next year, early 2020.
So you are accepting applications, you're just not reviewing anything.
That's correct.
Delegate Charkoudian.
As I was just going to say, thank you, Mr. Chair, that is essentially the same thing. To accept an application and put it in a pile seems equivalent to saying you can't give us an application. So PJM has repeatedly said every time I've seen any presentation from PJM that Maryland policies have led to the current situation. And I think citing policies, I think that's fair enough. But I think as it relates to environmental policies, there's not a single policy anyone can point to that shuts down coal plants. And there's not a single policy that anyone can point to that shuts down or keeps gas plants from coming online in Maryland. You talked about the atmosphere and goals that we've written on paper. And yet, the thing that is actually keeping new generation from coming online, we can point to, and it is at PJM. It is the rules at PJM. It's PJM's inability and unwillingness to plan, despite the fact that we've been signaling for 20 years with our RPS policies that we were going to get to this point. And PJM hasn't planned for and led to the crisis that we're facing. And I think that's really important for two reasons. One is because if we really want to resolve this crisis, we've got to resolve the queue. Now, I appreciate the fact that here we are 8 years later, and PJM has a solution that's starting to resolve the queue. Because of PJM, not because of any state policy, we're facing a reliability problem. We're facing a place where supply and demand are not matching. That by itself would not have jacked up the prices 800% in the last capacity market. In fact, what jacked up the prices most of the way is because PJM has rules, PJM rules, not Maryland rules, that don't count RMR in the capacity auction. And PJM has rules that changed recently about how ELCC is calculated. And so what we saw was an 800% jump. I would say that PJM is 100% responsible for the increase in capacity payments that we're facing.
That's Delegate Lorig Charkoudian. RMR stands for Reliability Must Run, which is a category of generating stations that must remain open even at extra cost to ensure peak electricity demand is met, notwithstanding the fact that they may be polluting coal plants. ELCC stands for Effective Load Carrying Capability, which is how RTOs like PJM calculate how much generation they can depend on from different types of electricity generating plants. Stanek explained that PJM takes into account 95% of installed capacity of a nuclear power plant, but only 8% of installed capacity for a fixed direction solar farm. Jason Stanek has agreed to join the show to answer these and other questions. Stay tuned. In the middle of the pandemic, rental eviction became a major concern across the country. The state of Maryland in 2021 set up a program to give renters on the verge of eviction legal assistance in a plan called Access to Counsel in Evictions, ACE. A recent report commissioned by the state has found that it worked. In the last fiscal year, 2023-24, the program's attorneys closed 9,196 cases with an estimated impact on 21,000 people, just short of half of them children. They were disproportionately female and Black. A third lived with a disabled person. Something like 90% of the people who wanted to remain in their homes in the face of eviction proceedings were able to remain in their homes. A majority had disputes with their landlords over how much back rent they owed. Most of the time, we hear about government ineffectiveness. It is usually that a department is short of money. Most of the time, we hear of government inefficiency. It's usually that a department is spending too much for too little. Permitting departments broadly fall into the latter category. In the case of Montgomery County, Maryland's Department of Permitting Services, it's long been in the crosshairs, sometimes unfairly for being the face of the county's difficult business environment. It is a somewhat unique, but in no way a singular case. The department is run using monies collected as permitting fees from residents and businesses wanting to build, add, repair, and even demolish. And it seems that it is flush and doesn't quite know what to do with the money. The situation, according to the county legislative analyst Bilal Ali, has existed for a few years now. Apparently, during the pandemic, the county collected a lot of money in permitting fees, but had artificially low costs. Not clear what artificially low cost means. When a government department like Montgomery County's Permitting Services is run with monies from revenues it generates, it is often treated as an enterprise, and its budget is treated as an enterprise fund. Here is how things went down in the work session of the County Council's Economic Development Committee this week. The legislative analyst Bilal Ali starts us out.
They are an enterprise fund, and so the budget discussions were really focused on some more higher level issues like a large fund balance that was the result sort of COVID and increased activity and artificially low costs. And so there was some discussion about strategies to spending that down. The council specifically recommended that they invest in their IT upgrade, which they were planning to do, and also to identify other ways that they could spend it down. With regards to the fund balance, they're currently estimating that in FY25 it'll end at $40.8 million, which is lower than last year.
Ali's legislative packet for the meeting provided that in 2022, the department had a fund balance of 56.5% of its budget when it was supposed to have 20%. In fiscal year 2025, they expect this number to be down to about 46% or about $39 million, still 25% over. There are two ways to read this. One, the department is so efficient that the county could potentially think about bringing down its permitting fees and giving residents a break. Or the department maintains a backlog. They do have a lower number for service request resolutions, but all the other key numbers are up. Permitting Services Director Rabia Sabakan was up next.
If we set 90%, benchmarks, then we need to be close to that or exceed. And, I think for the most part, we have been hitting those benchmarks, but, for various reasons, we have, not attained. And so everything is steady by the numbers, but it's again points to how quickly we're doing those reviews. That's the challenge. And making sure that we have the resources. Even though we're an enterprise fund, we still wanted to be careful when it comes to enhancement requests.
Council member Natalie Fanny Gonzalez, who's also the chair of the Economic Development Committee, followed up.
I have a question, and it relates to the backlog that we still have in the review process for both commercial and residential, especially the commercial front. We need to expedite things and make sure that we do it, efficiently. Can you give me an update because I thought you were considering using the surplus that you have to hire a third party to help you deal with a backlog that we currently have?
Third party review or inspection. I know they both are utilized by surrounding jurisdictions. It's a little bit of a touchy subject. We have to work with our unions as well. So anytime that discussion comes up, it has to be carefully looked at, with our unions as to whether or not that is something that works. If we feel like, hey, this is something that could be very beneficial to us, we will certainly go to them and say, this is, what we're proposing. And we haven't gotten to that point. It's just been up for consideration.
What's the deadline? What's the schedule to make sure that we're up to date with every single application that we have received.
Permitting Services Deputy Director Ehsan Mutazedi.
I mean, for transparency, we gave you all the numbers. I mean, I could have gave you some numbers from our right-of-way, other thing we were hitting like in the 90s and all that. So one of the issues we were facing last year as we were updating our e-plans, this is where everybody submits their plan through the electronic system. We were down for days, if not for weeks, during the upgrading. So these numbers, as you go into FY25, and as you know, the next few months, these numbers should drastically improve. We have looked at the third party that when we have a backlog to be able to get people professional that can come and assist us. Unfortunately, it's really hard. We even have a hard time filling some of our vacancies in commercial because of this being really expertise in that field.
Council member Lorianne Sales took an outreach angle.
What are we doing to capture our success stories?
I found that a lot of the negative perceptions are actually from like 10 years ago. No matter what kind of improvements you make over the course of recent years, we have the ability to control the narrative. And that's what I think when you point to our podcast, rather, that's that's a valuable tool to let people see the good that we're doing. A lot of the focus is always, we would like to get permits faster. And sure, that's always going to be our emphasis. But that podcast, again, is one effective tool.
How many people are tuning into the podcast?
We're actually getting a lot of, especially once we went from audio to video, we started to see the increase in the amount of views. I mean, is it like viral type numbers?
Thousands, hundreds.
Over 5,000, 6,000, something like that.
Yeah, with 1 million residents, we have to go outside of our own utilities, and we should be speaking on other people's podcasts that have bigger viewership.
All right, then. Here is an open invitation to Permitting Director Saba Khan and his deputy directors to come talk about the changes they are bringing in the department on I Hate Politics. We are among the top 5% of all podcasts globally, according to Listen Notes. The city of Rockville amended its town center master plan, easing height restrictions for buildings and eliminating some off-street parking requirements. The revised zoning will now allow building heights up to 235 feet along the 355 Rockville Pike corridor. In the core of the town center, buildings can now go up to 200 feet, and along the edge of the town center, 85 feet. The parking regulation change eliminates required off-street parking minimums within half a mile of the Rockville Metro Station and within a quarter mile of BRT, Bus Rapid Transit stations. That's all for this episode. Be sure to check out our feature interview series that come out Friday mornings. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from the newly in public domain tunes from the 1920s. We heard the Paul Whiteman Band, their work, I Will See You in My Dreams, and Carl Fenton's Limehouse Blues. Those were within the episode. And now we go out with Jan Garber with the number I Want to Be Happy. Who can argue with that? Usually we feature local music on the show. If you want to share your music on the podcast or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. See you next time.